Hello, everyone. Welcome to DEI, a podcast dedicated to discussing and raising awareness on the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. My name is Kara Xie, and we're thrilled today to have Dr. Kylie Clark with us. Dr. Clark is the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Howard County Library System. She is a LGBTQ rights activist, fighting for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Dr. Clark has been featured on NPR News and many other mediums with her actions and active discussion to embrace identity. Thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Clark.
Well, thank you, Kara. And first, before we get started, I just need to say congratulations to you for taking on such an important and deep topic as a high schooler. And there are lots of adults who aren't having these conversations. So I just want to say that I really admire the work that you're doing to bring this conversation to you and your peers.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, I really think Gen Z needs a medium for it too. Um, can you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and your identity?
Sure. So my background has always been within the diversity, equity, social justice space. So I've worked mostly in higher education. Um, this job is a job that I have at a public library. And so it's the first time that I've been in a public library setting. But the public library is as a sort of nonprofit. So it kind of fits, it's still within the education space. And so we just do education a little bit differently from higher education. I have over my about 35-year career have done many of the roles that would come under the kind of diversity multicultural umbrella. So I've worked with disability services. I've worked with LGBTQ populations directly. I've done affirmative action, multicultural affairs. And I think the only thing that I haven't really done is working for an actual women's kind of program or center. But certainly there are a lot of gender issues and things that I work with in my work over time. And this job right now is actually a senior leadership position. I report directly to the president and CEO of the library and serve as one of the C-suite officers for the library, which is a really great position to be in. There's an opportunity to make really good, lasting change. And so, yeah, I'm really enjoying this. It's a brand new position for me. I've only been there for about 12 months. As far as my own personal identities, I use she, her pronouns. I identify as a cisgender, pansexual, Black woman in America. I also am the parent of 3 adult children. So that's always fun because they're always your kids. And it's been really great to watch them change and grow into the adults that they are doing and the way that they're thriving in the world. My wife and I live here in the middle of Maryland, which is where our library is located. And we are just having a great time being in a new space, which is really much more diverse than where we came from, which was in upstate New York. So
Oh,
that's a little bit about me.
can you elaborate on how you ventured into this job or some of the past issues that you tackled and found interesting with your past jobs?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's one thing I didn't say about myself, which may be helpful, is that I kind of come from a line of people who do this work. And so you know how the lawyer's kid becomes a lawyer and the doctor's kid becomes a doctor and the college professor's kid becomes a professor. Well, my grandmother was active in the civil rights movement. I have a wonderful picture of her and Dr. King, which I know everybody says, but I really do. My mother was very politically active and very active in the Black Power movement. So if you think about the history of the United States, we had the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, and that kind of morphed into the Black Power movement of the kind of 70s and 80s, which kind of morphed into the Black Lives Matter movement into the 90s and the 2000s, right? And so I literally was, I guess, set up to do this work from having a strong relationship with my grandmother and a strong relationship with my mother. And so now I'm the third generation of women in my family who are working for social justice. And I think that the trajectory that I've been on has been working with affirmative action and multicultural affairs back in the 90s. And that really helped me to understand how affirmative action is especially about, excuse me, my computer's doing something. All right, let me just fix it. Affirmative action is especially about how do we bring diverse kinds of people into our systems. But once people who have not typically worked together are together in one place, how do we help them to understand each other and be productive for the organization, right? So that was way back 30 years ago that I had that particular opportunity. And then I've had opportunities since then. So that was like a broad kind of overarching organizational view. Then I've had opportunities since then to work in more narrow aspects. So like working particularly with LGBTQ students on college campuses, working particularly with LGBTQ people out in the community, working particularly with the needs of students with disabilities on college campus, right? Working particularly for the needs of students of color, second language learners who are coming into the university. And so that broad kind of introduction to this area, and then having the opportunity to really concentrate on the needs of specific populations, I think has really prepared me to do the work that I'm doing now, because what I do now kind of mixes everything, right? So it's both the leadership in the broad organizational view, and how do we support individual employees and customers who are coming into the library with the needs that they have.
Right. Wow, that's crazy. A family of changers and activists.
Yeah, but I have to say my youngest is on the road. So I said to him,
Wow.
I was like, you realize that I think you got the gene.
The fourth
They're like, yeah,
generation.
I know.
What
They're
are
into
some recent?
climate activism and union organizing and some other
Wow.
things. So yeah, it's fun.
Carry on the lineage.
Yes.
What are some recent updates or projects that you are working on right now that you would like to share with the Gen Z populations?
Sure. I think one of the things that is, so first of all, I know that Gen Z, the generation, I think, who is it, Gen Alpha right now, especially
Mm.
Gen Z, are really taking employers to task to be companies that actually live out good ethical considerations, right? And so I think it's important for people to understand. So as you are getting ready to go to college or getting ready to look for your first job or thinking about what your career trajectory might be, that there are organizations that are actually doing great work in making sure that we are living up to all the rhetoric that we talk about. I know that it seems like right now that the world's on fire, and every headline I see is like, oh, Wall Street, I just saw one yesterday, Wall Street is finally giving up on DEI.
Right.
That's not really true. All of those things are meant to kind of scare us, I think. But
Mm.
there are organizations like my own that are deeply committed to being anti-racist, gender inclusive, LGBTQ safe organizations, right? And so one of the projects that I'm working on right now that supports how we walk the talk is a racial equity audit that we are getting ready to have. We have hired a firm that is going to come in, and they look at every single thing. Like I have a list this long of all the things that they need to see. So it's looking at our board policies, right? The board of
Mhm.
trustees runs the organization, so our board policies. It's looking at our internal policies for employees, so the employee manual and handbook. It's looking at committee minutes, right? So what are the committees that happen around the library when they are taking minutes? They want to see what these committees have been working on and how often equity, anti-racism, those kinds of things are showing up in the work that we're doing. Like, so we might say it on the website. The idea
Mhm.
is how much of it are we actually doing in our daily practice, right? Of course, they'll be looking at our website, they'll be looking at all of our print materials that we distribute throughout the community. They're going to talk to all of our stakeholders. That includes staff as well as our customers who use the library. They'll also talk to our community partners. So there are other organizations in town that we partner with to do lots of things around the community.
Mhm.
So that equity audit is going to then produce a report that's handed back to us where we get a chance to really see from a third party's perspective, like independent people, how well we're actually walking the talk, right?
Right.
So from there, we have an internal equity committee that will take that report. They will look at all the things and create an annual equity action plan, which will help us to kind of address all of the things that we find in the report. Some things will be easy, right? Some things might be, ask HR to update this policy.
Mhm.
That can be done in a week, right?
Right.
Other things will be, it could come out that, we don't see enough work being done to make the library accessible to people with disabilities.
Mhm.
Though that would be a long-term
Right.
conversation for people to have about what then does it look like? How do we pull in members of the community with disabilities to help us think about how we do a better job, right?
Mhm.
So that's one project that is starting next week. So you got me right at the right time, because it's right on the top of my head. Um, but I think it's an important, I wanted to make sure that I mention it because as Gen Z is out there looking for the next step, this is the kind of thing that you want to ask employers. This is the kind of thing that you want to look for on their website. The report should be available, right? You
Mhm.
should be able to see on a website that they have an equity committee
Right.
that is working on things, right? You should be able to see that they have a sustainability committee because obviously green work and sustainability is important to Gen Z. So all of those things that are important to you ethically and morally, you should look for. And, when you go into an interview for a job, you can ask those questions. Tell me
Mhm.
a little bit about your diversity, equity, and inclusion work here at, company XYZ, right?
Right. Yeah. I think that's really meaningful because there's a lot of news going around about like top Fortune company, like 500 companies trying to fire their DEI officers and not
Yeah,
really working with DEI. So, but people don't really see the long-term effects of like what we can build up.
exactly. And people don't understand. So let me share with your viewers the actual business case for DEI because I think that that's where people get confused.
Mm.
I think the folks who are looking to tear down DEI right now are doing so because they believe that it's trying to brainwash people or it's trying to push everybody to have the same viewpoint, right? Like we've got to get everybody into this liberal mindset. That is not the actual business case for DEI, nor is it what it is that we are trying to do, right? The
Mhm.
actual business case for DEI is what I said earlier, bringing in diverse groups of people. Now, your generation is going to be the most diverse generation that we've probably had in the United States ever, particularly because we have more people who are identifying outside of the gender binary,
Right.
right? And so, for the first time, probably in a couple of millennia, because we've had it because it has been so clamped down on because of colonial expansion within the United States and around the world, that third gender people or people who feel like they're outside of the typical gender binary can express themselves. Gen Z has a huge population of folks, right? 25%, maybe a little bit more at least. And so this is a very diverse generation.
Mm.
Imagine right now in the workplace, we have 5 generations of people. Boomers are still working, right? Then we've got your Gen Xers, your millennials, you've got your
And alpha.
Gen Zers, and then Gen Alpha starting to come out of high school and into the workforce. So 5 generations of people, and all of that diversity creates complexity. That's the big thing that we know about. The whole entire earth is diverse. Mother Nature was built on being diverse, right? But when you have a diverse system, it is super complex. Think about just, again, the nature of the earth itself. Super complex systems to support all of the diversity that we have. So think about bringing all of those people into a business place, right? It could be the McDonald's at the end of the corner, right? That has somebody's grandpa's taking orders, and then somebody who just left high school is flipping burgers in the back, right? Or somebody's grandpa's flipping burgers, and somebody who came out of school to their after school job at McDonald's is taking orders at the front, right? 5 generations, all that diversity. Or it could be the biggest multinational company, right?
Mhm.
All of those people. The business case for DEI is, and all of the studies bear this out, so you can actually look up these studies that many places have done. When you bring diverse groups of people together, it's a hot mess. We don't know each other. We don't know how to work together. I don't think the way you think. And I look at what you're doing and I'm like, what are you doing? And you're
Mhm.
looking at me going like, what are you doing? That's not the way we do it in my house, right? That's not the way I grew up doing things. It's a hot mess. If you bring that same group of people together and give them some training around how to work together, around seeing, instead of being aggravated by the fact that you see something differently than the way I see it, when I'm helped to understand that it is a business strength to have two people with different viewpoints, right? Because now we got some creativity going on. Now we have some interesting ways that we might be able to solve a problem that beats our competitor. We might be
Mhm.
able to get some interesting things to the marketplace before somebody else does, because there's 10 people from around the world on this team who all think about things differently.
Mm.
Now, research shows that when you give those people ways to see each other's difference as something to be used and as a strength, that they are infinite, they're exponentially better producing teams. Some teams are as high as 33% more productive, more creative, able to problem solve. When you give a team a leader that actually understands how to include everybody's perspectives, right? Like you've
Yeah.
all seen a movie where the lady in the meeting raises her hand and says something, and they're like, yeah, whatever. And then the
Yeah.
guy raises his hand and says the same thing. And they're like, oh my God, that's the most brilliant idea, right? When you have a leader for your team who will hear the woman's perspective and doesn't do that, right? Who wants everybody's perspective in, those companies make more money.
Right.
They are better able to meet their financial obligations, right? And so people need to understand what it is that I do as a DEI officer, because at the bottom line is, if I can help this diverse group, and my company is only 245 people, we're a pretty small place. We have 6 branches in our library. But if I can help those 250 people learn to see each other's strengths as amazing and opportunities, as opposed to aggravating, like, oh my God, I wish they would stop doing that, right? I don't want that. I want you to see it as, oh my God, I'm so glad you brought that perspective to the table, because I would have never thought about that before. But now that you mention it, how can we bridge what you just said and what you just said and what I'm thinking into something amazing, right? If I can get people to do that, then we are meeting and exploding our company. We're creating high performing teams. That's what DEI is. And all of the people out there just making a bad name for what we do is sad, because at the end of the day, I don't know if you've seen some of the quotes going around from Mark Cuban
Oh yeah.
from Shark Tank. He's
Yes.
right. He's like, I won't bet on a company that doesn't get its DEI right, because he
Right.
knows DEI is the magic superpower that is
Mm.
going to fuel the most creative, most productive, most wealthiest, right? Most money-making ventures.
Yeah, thank you so much for clearing it up with the audience, because there's for sure a very deep misconception of what really
Yes.
goes into work with DEI. And like I personally, like when I got into this, I would read reports from companies and I'd have a better understanding of what people are doing. But whenever I talk to my peers about it, like I have a peer trying to start a nonprofit for like diverse DEI in
Mhm.
art, but I don't think they really understand the background and why you actually do it. So thanks for clearing it up with the
You're
audience.
welcome.
And you also mentioned something when you were explaining like how people think that, well, we're pushing one idea to everybody, which is like to conform with like this diversity idea. And that like kind of the as a Florida student, I'm deeply aware of the effects of that, because we have like anti-woke acts and
Yes.
stuff like that. And I know recently the 11th Circuit declared the Anti-Woke Act as unconstitutional. So what is some of your views on using policy and legislative power to deny inclusion?
Yeah, it's the exact opposite, right? I mean,
Right.
um, I'm really, really sad. You know, I have colleagues that I talk to around the country who are trying to figure out, because they understand the power of what it is that we're doing and the importance of what it is that we're doing. I mean,
Mhm.
it's not just the business case, right? There is a business case. The reason why we do it is because we want to win. You
Right.
win with high performing teams. You create
Yes.
high performing teams with really talented, diverse groups of people, right?
Mhm.
However, there is the ethical and moral standard, right? I don't want people in my organization to be suffering because they're experiencing racism or misogyny or, you know, homophobia or transphobia. Nobody wants to come to work every day and face you know, the biggest part of your life, right? This is the longest your day. You're going to spend more time with your coworkers than you do with your spouse and family, right? Nobody wants to get up and go into a place where they're being assaulted all the time because of people who just don't understand them. So, yes, there is also a moral imperative for the work that we're doing. And it is the exact opposite of what is happening within some of these legislative chambers, um, forcing people not to be able to read certain books, right? Anti wokeness, not sharing a broad history of the, like what's going on in Florida right now. Oh, I'm so sorry, Kara. You know, it's like, okay, so they're wanting to teach things, or they're wanting to chop out all like whole sections of history so that students don't learn about it.
Mhm.
I saw something where there was a school district that was banning books, right? The exact opposite of diversity, right? Kind
Right, right.
complex, open conversation. No, we want you to read only these books. It's the exact opposite. But there was this book. It was a beautiful book. It was about an old Jewish woman who lived in an apartment complex. And every Saturday, she would cook like a Sabbath soup. And she would invite her neighbors over because her children were all grown and gone. And she would invite her neighbors from the building. There was like the person with the disability, and there's a Spanish family, and there's a Black family, and there's, you know, all the families, and they would all have soup together. They had like adopted this woman as the kind of grandma of the building.
Mhm.
So one day they came home on a Saturday and they don't smell the soup cooking. It's like, oh my goodness, what's wrong with Mrs. So-and-so? But the soup should be cooking by now. So they go over and find out that she's not feeling well. And so the whole rest of the building cooks soup and brings it to her, right? Why would we ban that for
I know.
children? The
I
the
know.
the the artwork was gorgeous. The I mean, what that's anti woke.
Yes.
Like, I don't
Yes.
get that.
Yes.
It's teaching community. It's teaching acceptance. It's teaching, that we get together and we care about each other. Um, it's everything that we think that we would want to have, right? And so
Right.
I don't understand it. And
I know.
I'm sorry, I think it's really dangerous um for legislatures to be codifying these things into law.
Right.
It takes a long time to undo laws. So, for people who don't want this, to try to undo it is really hard.
Yes. And especially apart from the anti-woke book banning, the don't say gay ban is something else. I know you're very familiar with it. I've seen your interview with NPR, but um it's I also find that really ridiculous because we almost had our AP psychology course canceled because of just like one little chapter on it. And I think our teachers, because I have a lot of my psychology teacher said they had to change the curriculum in our district to make sure that it's still taught so that we don't teach students about the different identities that people can have. And the quote that our governor said was, we think this should be up to the parents to teach their children who they become. And I really think you should have a right to know about all the different people you can become, whether it's from your parents or from school. So um can you actually I know you're very familiar with the don't say gay ban, so can you explain to our audience what it is and the detrimental effects it might have on the younger generation growing up and like being educated in this environment?
Just think about what you just said, right? The governor doesn't want the governor says that parents should teach their children who they should become. So there's the first issue. I mean, I'm sorry, this doesn't directly address your question, but coming from like my youngest, who is the diversity now person in the family, when they were 5, they would wear 2 different socks to school. Okay, express yourself. There are parents who literally would be like, no, go back and change your socks. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
They are born to us, but they are not our possessions. Like, you are not our possessions, right?
Right.
You already are your own independent people, and you
Mm-hmm.
are going to be who you become. It
Mm-hmm.
is not up to your parents
Mm-hmm.
who you become, because you actually already exist separate from them, right?
Right.
And so the this anti-wokeness and the don't say gay bills are really about shielding people from the broad diversity of folks in the world,
Yes.
because the thought is that perhaps if you understand that there are lots of different ways of being in the world, that you will have more agency to become lots of different things. You will have more agency to dream big. I don't know anybody who was ever made gay. Think
Yeah.
about that, because that means that if we think that that works, that means that every male child who has grown up in a single household with a female parent should have turned into a woman, because
Right.
obviously that's how that works. Every female child who has grown up in a household with a single male parent clearly is going to be a man, because obviously that's how it transfers. It just doesn't make any sense. And so
No.
for us to really understand where the fear is, these are one of the probably the biggest tool that is used against equity principles and diversity is fear. When we can get people to be afraid of each other, then we have everything that we need in the recipe in order to keep people from making those real and genuine connections, right?
Mhm.
If we can instill fear into the system, then even though somebody is may identify as trans or identify as gay in the spectrum. I just learned Q plus, which I love. I saw somebody use that. I was like, ooh, Q plus. So inside the Q plus community, right? It's not that we're not going to have queer people. It's
Right.
that we're going to create a society that has so much fear that the queer people will go back into the closet. So I think that they understand that it doesn't make any sense to think that we create people, right? But if you're going to be gay, we don't want to see you. And so I'm going to cut off every opportunity for you to learn anything or to be made to feel whole, visible, wanted, worthy, right? If I cut off all the books to you, and if I make sure that your teachers can't put up rainbows, and if there's no pride flag, and as a matter of fact, if I make sure that your queer teachers can't be themselves in the classroom, then I effectively create
Right.
enough fear for you to go back into the closet.
Yes, unfortunately, it's like that. And half of the books they ban are related to LGBTQ identities.
Yes.
It's just everything's really politically sensitive at this moment. And I also do newspaper at my school, and there's certainly a lot of topics we can't even touch on
Mm-hmm.
when it's like I had to fight to get this DEI channel on my school newspaper because of the voices that it might like get out and the discussions that it might like erupt. And I'm like, are you not supposed to have discussions growing up? Because that's literally what education to me is all about.
You would think. And it's
Yeah.
really interesting, but back way, way, way back when I first started doing this work, I was in a little tiny, teeny college town, and there were maybe about 1,500 total school students in
Mm,
the district, so really small. And we had a young man in fifth grade. Now, this is how small the town was. Like everybody knew this, right?
right,
We had a
right.
young man in fifth grade who decided to take ballet.
Mm,
Oh my goodness, you would have thought that somebody like murdered the king cow in town. Um, he was bullied so badly, right? As a professional at the university, they actually called me in to try and help with the situation at the school district. But one of the things that was really interesting was that there was a gym teacher who taught fourth grade and third grade. And she said, these kids are already having this I listen to what happens in the locker room when they're changing clothes. They're talking about this stuff all the time, right?
yeah.
So do we want them to talk about it in a vacuum without any information, and with false information, or only information that they're getting off of weird places on the internet? Or
Right, right,
we
right.
want to support you folks in having good,
Mhm.
strong, you know, open, supported,
Communication.
educational, learning opportunity conversations, right?
Right.
I think that
Yes.
that's what we would want as adults. But so part of it is, what is the intended impact? So here's another
Mhm.
tip for all of your viewers. As you're looking at these things, instead of getting kind of upset about how ridiculous it sounds, try to trace it back to what you think the intended impact of what's happening is, right?
Mhm.
So the intended impact of not having drag story hour is to short circuit the ability for families to have a rich and meaningful connection to people who are parts of our community. So, like, if I'm part of the queer community, drag is deeply important to me, right? as a
Mhm.
member of the community. And members of our community have many more children than I think we've ever had before, right? And so if I want to take my 5-year-old to experience the culture that is deeply important to me, it's not when I take them to drag story hour, it's not sexualized. Give me a break. We're parents. It's like, God,
Right.
right? But it's a part of my culture that I want to extend. Now that we have so many couples with children, it makes perfect sense that we would have drag story hour, right? It's just part of our culture.
Right.
Um, so what is the intended impact, right? Yeah,
Yes.
it's nothing that they know that it's not sexualized. Come on. So
Yeah.
most of the drag story hours that I've seen, folks are dressing up. They look almost more like clowns. They kind of look like Miss Frizzle, right?
Oh,
Yes. I
yeah.
mean,
Yeah. I know. And also for this is more educational to corporational. So like companies in the private sectors like Google, Meta, OpenAI are held as like distributors, and that is rewarded and celebrated. Why do you think those who have been suppressed when they want to demand change and equity, they're labeled as negative? Is that only a race problem, or it's is it what problem do you think it is? Like the intent behind it?
oh, so I think that's a really deep question, and let me see if I can answer it in a way that is honest and kind of makes sense without getting too deep about it.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, it's really about power and control. And I know that your generation understands consent much more than any other generation that we've had, because it's really talked about much more openly right now. But so if you think about all the training that you've had around sexual assault and consenting relationships, it's we understand that sexual assault is about power and control. That's
Right.
it, right? It's not about what clothes they were wearing. It's not about the fact that they were drunk or high or whatever, all the things that you've ever learned, right? It's the same thing. What is going on right now is all about power and control.
Mm.
It's not about drag story hour. It's not about the fact that it was a gay person in the book, right? It all of that is superficial. At the end of the day, what is the intended impact? The intended impact is to maintain power and control concentrated in a certain group of people with a certain worldview that they do not want to change, right? And so um, it's really unfortunate that we're having like you couldn't have told me 20 years ago that we would be here right now, because I really thought that we were on a trajectory. What I have learned since then, and I just did some history training. So I've had like 2.5 days of training on American history
Mm.
the last month. And what I realized by looking back at history is that this all cycles.
Right.
And so
Again and
if
again.
exactly again and again. And so if we look at where we are right now, it honestly makes perfect sense, right? Um, we had 400 years of slavery, and the
Right.
country never intended for there to be this kind of diversity. It wasn't part of the intent, right? There was a very clear split when we had the Civil War. Following the Civil War and the freedom of the slaves, the Reconstruction period was a good 10-year period where Black people had real agency, authority, power. We had our very first congressmen and senators in the 1870s. Like people don't really remember this, but yes, there was a time when so when you think about the first Black senator, if we think about like, oh, Barack Obama is a senator, no, back in the 1800s, the first
Right.
Black senators, right? But what we saw was that lasted for 10 years. And the people who wanted power and control figured out ways to get the power and
Get it back
control
again.
back, right? So we had power and control during slavery, 10 years where we lost it. Then we went into Jim Crow. For 100 years of Jim Crow, power and control was back.
Right.
Then we had the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act in the 60s, right?
Mm,
Housing, all that stuff. And so we kind of lost control again. And so
yes.
we've had all this stuff that's happening. And then we had a very important moment in our history, which was we elected our first Black president. And so if we look at that as another marker, kind of like Reconstruction, oh my goodness, we're losing control again, like, or we've lost it.
Right.
It makes perfect sense that we are in this backlash where we are right now.
Again.
So
Mhm.
it's not, so what I'm saying is it doesn't, it almost doesn't have anything to do with Ron DeSantis or individual actors. Even Trump, like it's not so much about the individual supermajorities, the
Yes.
Supreme Court. So all the places where we see this super conservative, it's not about those people as individual people or individual personalities, right? Think about it in the historic, and
Mhm.
that it's about how this country historically reacts to certain
Right.
people having more power. And so we're kind of where we probably should be, right? What we have to remember is that every other time that this has happened, because it's not the first time, the people who wanted to be free and unoppressed and to express themselves and to be fully functioning, contributing citizens to this country stood up and
And fall for
continued to
themselves.
fight exactly for themselves. And what feels different to me in this moment is that, and maybe it's not different, I'm not a historian, had some history. But what feels different to me in this moment is there feel like a lot of people who are giving up. Like, I don't think I'm
Right.
gonna vote. Like,
There's
yeah,
so many quiet voices.
yes, people need to go vote, right?
Yeah.
Get yourselves up and vote. If you don't want the thing that you're seeing happening, it's our opportunity. But we have to be like every other generation and stand up for ourselves.
Right. And also, this happened really recently with President Claudine Gay's public takedown in Harvard. And as a society, we probably witnessed like a lifelong scholar and champion. Well, she kind of made history too as the first
Yes.
president of identity. Yeah. And of being like forced, we probably witnessed the first person like her being removed from office. And it's also a lot of people praise it as a successful anti-DEI campaign. Do
Hmm.
you think the people who have won have showed us their power through this action?
Yes, I think they have. And what's really sad to me, we just lost another person. So
Right.
the chief diversity officer at Johns Hopkins just stepped down. I think it was like yesterday, sometime this week, right? Because
Everybody's stepping down.
yeah, and all through my LinkedIn feed, I got people. I've said there's a young man right now. He's probably in his late 20s, so Gen Zer, or maybe the last of the millennials. And he was like, you know what? I started off in DEI, but this is not sustainable. Join me in jumping ship and moving on to another career path. And I'm like, dude, if you go, you are correct. It will be unsustainable
Right.
to stick and stay, right? And so yeah, I think that it's showing that the power that the people have to
Change so many
change these
things.
things is working, because
They
people
can
are
narrate things the way they
here.
want.
Well, and it's a little bit of terror, right? It's a little bit of terrorism because part of what's happening, I mean, we've had the same thing happen with library directors across the country, right? There are library directors across the country who have literally quit their jobs, not necessarily because they're not down for the fight, but because their lives have been made a living hell. People find out they already know where you work. They find out where you live. They send you emails that have the names of your children. They send, I mean, and there are library directors around the country who have gotten death threats, right? If you don't take these books off the shelves, you're a groomer and you're this and all the rhetoric, right? Um, that is terrorism.
It
And so
is.
if it so the thing that bothers me about this is, if your point of view is unsustainable without you cheating, then maybe you should think about that, right? Because if you have to resort to terror in order to get your books banned from the library, then that is really, I mean, let's think about where we are as a society right now. It's
Yes,
scary.
it is scary.
Yeah.
Very scary. Yeah.
So that fear is the biggest tool. So if we can create fear, if we can all show up uh with in those open carry states with our guns visible to the drag story hour, that's the way that I get Jack Story Hour to stop.
Maybe
That's
one day that will happen.
and no, that's happening already. So right,
Yeah,
I mean, so it's like, I don't think that that's a fair fight. I want to argue about this on a ideological level. I want to talk about how all of this is like, that's what DEI is doing. I'm not using fear tactics to help
right.
people understand.
To include people.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is a very unfair fight. Um, do you have any message that, because the youth right now are getting the message to unlearn DEI, to
Mhm.
learn AI, to ignore the all the like things to include everybody. Um, what do you want? Is there any message that you want to get out to the Gen Z population or that you hope we are educated on?
So let's actually take an opportunity as we wrap up to define DEI. I think that might help, right? So diversity just is. The world is diverse. How many different species of bugs are there? Like millions, right? They're like,
Yeah.
diversity is just the way that the world is. It makes sense then that people, as part of the world, are diverse. We are never ever going to get away from it. It is always has been and always will be the way that things are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't make it up. It just is, right? Okay. So then equity becomes, what is it that people need in order to be successful, right?
Right.
And because of different positionality within the world, different people need different things. The person
Mm-hmm.
who uses a wheelchair needs something different in life to be successful than the person who does not use a wheelchair, right? The
Mm-hmm.
person who doesn't have money to go to college needs something different to be successful than the person who has a parent who's going to write a check to go to college, right? So
Right.
we just know that equity is the thing that people need in order, that's the condition that people need to have in order to be successful. And we
Yes.
understand that that's different for everybody. Inclusion then becomes, right? How do I create a way for you to feel like you matter within the space, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is my behavior towards you that makes you feel included.
Yes.
Belonging, belonging, which is the B that we haven't talked about, but is included in my job description, is the feeling that I get that I am a worthy and belonging member of this community, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I think if we think about DEIB in that way, that how can people argue against that? It includes all of us. There is nobody ever left out of that equation.
Mm-hmm.
Straight, white, cis hetero men are included in that
Not
equation,
just
right? And so nobody's left out. It's not that we're going to privilege a few people, but it's making sure that everybody is included. And so I think if you think about it this way, um, it doesn't make sense to give up DEI. Like, why would we do? It's just, yeah.
I know.
I
Yeah.
don't want to. I don't want to talk to the same. I've used several different AI programs, and they all spit back the same information. I'll ask it the same question, it all spits back the same thing. It sounds the same because it's all drilling from the same
Same
websites,
brains.
right? The same, exactly. And here's the thing that's going to happen with AI is, the more people begin to use AI to create things that go into the buckets that AI is then pulling from, you're going to begin to get a loop. So then where does the human where does the human intellect intercede in that which is going to become its own feedback loop? So in 50 years, if AI is pulling from things that AI has generated,
Yes, like where
where
does woman like human stuff come in?
exactly, exactly. So yeah, be
What
careful with the AI. I mean, I think I use it myself. I think it's helpful, but
it
we
is
still need to be we need to
smarter
be smarter.
than thinking,
Yeah.
right? What challenges do you think exist in the this is a totally out of but like because you mentioned AI, what challenges do you think exist for DEI in the battle of algorithm like fairness and AI?
It's huge. It's really huge. I follow a couple TikTok creators who I'm very bad with names, so I couldn't tell you who they are right now, but that are ethicists in this space. And we realize that facial recognition software doesn't work as easily with darker skin tones and different hair textures. So if we're using facial recognition as part of our AI structure for finding criminals, like I watch on all of the criminal shows that you watch on TV, they've got, oh, let's find the video and look for the person. And then, I know it doesn't work as well on me. I've
Yeah,
actually mistaken for people who are not me on Facebook. You know how Facebook had used to, I don't know if they still
yeah,
do,
the face
they had like
feature.
the automatically the face feature that
Right,
tags
right, right.
people. I'm like, that is not me. And it doesn't look like me. Why are you doing that? So that's a problem. The problem, just the basic problem of people who are programming it, right? So
The
we
team
have to
that we have.
understand, right? We all have our own distinct point of view. This is why diverse teams are important. The reason that AI doesn't pick up on my skin tone as well is because the people who programmed it didn't think about how should it pick up on darker skin tones. If there had
Mhm.
been people who looked like me in the room, then all of the thoughts would have been there and we would have created a process that would have done the thing that needs to do, right? But that happens with every other thing.
Yes.
Um, and the fact that our brains are wired for negativity means that there's probably more negative information about different kinds of people on the internet than there is positive information, because if you're pulling from where people have dumped all of their bleh, and then we've decided that we're going to pull from there in order to create stuff,
Yeah.
there's going to be a negativity bias, right?
Mhm.
So yeah,
Right.
don't get me started with
The AI, yeah.
yeah, it's we did, and this is one of the reasons why we really need diversity in higher education. We need for all of the
Voices.
children, right? So think about everybody in your school. Think about how people are already pigeonholed into, think about your AP classes. Who's in there? Who's missing?
Hmm.
Who is not in your AP classes, right? It's not because they're not intelligent. It's because their life circumstances have been set up in a way that they haven't been able to do the thing that gets them to the AP class, right? And so that also means that they're not the person who got to MIT. They're not the person
Hmm.
who's working in Silicon Valley to help the AI see my skin tone. So
Right.
it goes all the way back to the fact that little Black boys in preschool are 50% more likely to be suspended from preschool,
Yes.
right? The reason AI doesn't see my skin tone goes all the way back to the fact that preschoolers are
Yeah.
being suspended. So when you have a kid who's been suspended in preschool, what could they possibly have done
Hmm.
that the other children weren't doing that would make you suspend them? But we know
Yeah.
that, right? And so it all is connected. Um, we need for people to get the thing that they need to be successful. And that is what DEI is all about. If we had all of those children never suspended from school, who went into kindergarten, who did really well, whose teachers didn't track them, whose teachers believed in them, who graduated up through and took all the AP classes, we would have, how many more people will we have who will be going into
Right.
AI, right?
It's a whole domino effect
It
with how
is.
society reacts to this.
It
But
is.
I'm so inspired by your work, and like you hang on there and really committing to what you believe in. And I really look up to that. Like even like you working so many jobs that's all related to this. Um so yeah, thank you so much and thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for the invitation. And again, congratulations. I really hope the work that you're doing is making a difference.